thank you for joining us for Around the World. My name is Heather Jacobson, and I'm the coordinator of International Student Services at PLU. I'll be moderating this panel this evening. Around the World is part of International Education Week, a nationwide celebration of the benefits of international education and exchange. And in a year when a global pandemic has forced us to stay closer to home, I hope this program will inspire you for when we are able to travel again more freely. So we have 3 student panelists who will share about a country that they have a connection to. While you're listening to the panelists, please type any questions you have either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. So to get started, I believe we are starting with Marissa.
Hi, y'all. My name is Marissa. I am a third-year student here at PLU, and I'm triple majoring in economics, French, and global studies with a concentration in international affairs. I'm going to share my screen now. So I have a presentation on Carnival and kind of the history of it. But first, a little bit of background on just my study abroad experience. So I studied abroad in Aix-en-Provence, France. You can see on the map a little dot near Marseille. That is around the third biggest city in all of France, and Aix is about a 30-minute drive away from it. So we're really close to the ocean in the south of France, near Italy. We took day trips to Monaco in Italy. You could drive to Spain pretty quickly too. It was really nice, very Mediterranean. I was at Institut Américain Universitaire in Aix, and in my fall semester, I was in the French honors program. And then in the spring, I took classes that were about my global studies degree. So if you can see at the very bottom right-hand corner, there's a little dot that points out Nice, and that is where we're focusing on today, very close to Monaco, and you can see how close it is to Italy. Before we get into that, I just wanted to point out some really cool things about Aix and the indigenous languages of France. You often don't think about the languages that are indigenous to Western countries in Europe, because you kind of just assume like French is spoken in France, Spanish is spoken in Spain, but in the south of France there are indigenous languages, and I thought it was really cool to be able to see the street signs that were in Provençal, which is the native language of the south. So when we're talking about the history of Mardi Gras, it is something that started in Europe. So Nice was actually owned by Italy up until around the mid-1800s. So this is a painting from, I believe, the late 1700s of Mardi Gras. And it's a festival that takes place in many Christian countries right before the holiday of Lent. So it's a really big festival where you basically indulge yourself in all of the things that you're going to be giving up for the next couple of weeks for Lent. And it has definitely changed over the years, as you're about to see. You can see in this photo that there are people wearing masks, they're dancing, there's a lot of people dressed like extremely fancy, and over the years that has changed to represent a lot of different things. So we have to talk first about Trinidad and Tobago, which is two countries that have a J-term program for PLU, or you can go and see Carnival yourself. So in these photos, you can see how Mardi Gras is celebrated completely differently there. And Trinidad and Tobago were colonized originally by Spain and then occupied by French and Italian colonialists. When they were occupying these islands, they brought their religious traditions with them. And these religious traditions were mixed with a lot of the Christian traditions from Western Europe and then indigenous traditions from the people that were originally living in the islands. So you can see that they have definitely made it their own. They have extremely bright costumes and parade floats and dancing and music that is completely different than what was seen in Western Europe. So then when we go to Nice, This is Carnival in Nice. So it has some influences from Trinidad and Tobago. You can see in the costumes and the floats. And it also has some influences from Italy. So they have, if you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a float that is poking fun at Donald Trump. That was the year that I went, this last year. And it is just kind of a big festival where you're able to dress up, play a role, and there are a lot of traditional foods that are eaten. I don't know if you guys know what a beignet is, but it's kind of like a donut that is deep fried. A lot of animal products are eaten because for Lent, a lot of people give them up. So you can see that there are people wearing masks. There are people that are eating a lot of savory foods that they aren't going to be able to eat. They're drinking alcohol, they're dancing, they're listening to music, and they're able to celebrate this with their friends before they go and have some time with Lent and get closer to their God. So if anyone has any questions about this festival, I would be more than happy to answer, or just about my study abroad experience in general. But if not, thanks.
Let's see if we get some questions coming in. All right, so we have, what's one of the biggest differences you noticed between French and American culture?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest difference is the type of topics that are taboo to talk about. So in France, like I know in America, I would never talk to someone about their political affiliation unless I'm like ready to have that conversation. You don't normally talk about money. You don't normally talk about race. You don't, there's like a lot of, and like sexuality, those aren't things that are talked about. And my very first night with my host family, my host mom was like, so what do you think about Donald Trump? What's up with that? And they're very into talking about race and religion. So I think just like learning to navigate the new circumstances of what was appropriate and normal to talk about. And I mean, like, they understand that it wasn't something that we were used to, but it is something that you definitely have to adapt to, because that's what all of the conversations at the very long dinners are about.
Nice. And then what was your favorite food from France, or some of multiple foods? We'll let you pick multiple ones.
Okay. I really enjoyed ratatouille. That's kind of a little stereotypical, but it is traditional to the south of France. Another thing that I enjoyed was the very cheap cheese and bread. I would buy like a baguette for less than $1 and cheese for less than $1 and some fruit, and I would eat that every single day. So being in the south of France, you get a lot of Mediterranean influence. So there's a lot of olive oil and tomatoes in the cooking, as opposed to the north where you're going to get a lot heartier food. You're going to be getting things with a lot of potatoes and red wine in them. So I enjoyed the food of the south more than the north.
How was it adjusting to French culture? You talked a little bit about that, but
it was a little bit overwhelming. You definitely had the culture shock and trying to ride that out. It was a little bit difficult, especially like outside of school, making friends with French people that weren't students. So, I mean, they obviously wanted to talk to me a lot in English, and they did not want to let me practice my French, which I was taking as an insult. I was like, I promise I can speak this language. Please, I'm not trying to insult you guys. But it's definitely an experience, and as long as you go into it with an open mind, I think that it's definitely doable.
What was a life lesson or an experience that that you won't forget?
A life lesson or an experience that I won't forget. That's a hard question. Can I think on it and come back to it?
Sure, but we got some other questions for you.
Okay.
Okay, so what was it like living and immersing yourself in that other language?
It definitely improved my fluency drastically. So I started studying French when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and then I took a break, and then I studied it from 7th grade up till now. So I had like a pretty okay level of fluency, but I was definitely shy. I did not want to talk to people in the language as much as I could. So I was able to pick up on the dialect of the South, throw in some of the slang words, get to talk more like a local and kind of get that fluency. But it definitely takes you wanting to do that, because I know I could have gotten around in France speaking only English, but being in the French immersion honors program, I kind of was forced into speaking the language as much as possible. And my host mom was completely fluent in English, but my host brother was like me. He knew English and then did not want to talk it at all. So it gave me a reason to practice my French more frequently, and it definitely was so beneficial.
Mm-hmm. I bet. Can you talk a little bit more about in France how people talk about race or race relations?
Yeah, so it matters where exactly they're talking about. When they talk about race relations in the US, it's very different than how they talk about race relations in France. They kind of see us as a little bit behind. I know a lot of the people of color that I spoke to in France expressed a fear about traveling to the US for their own personal safety, or traveling to the US, sorry, for their own personal safety, especially with the police brutality that has been seen a lot. The French media widely covers it. I would say I knew more about what was happening in America in France than I do watching the news here. And then there are some tricky race relations in France as well. I'm Romney, which is a religious minority group, an ethnic group. So that is a little bit harder to work around. There's still some backwards views on that. And through colonialism, there are a lot of immigrant populations, especially in the south of France, a lot of North Africans and Caribbeans. They are mostly accepted, and I would say they're a lot more accepted than immigrants in the United States, but it is definitely an interesting conversation to have. They're not afraid to have it, but I mean, there are racist people everywhere. Race relations are still talked about, you know.
Perfect. Well, have you thought of a life lesson or an experience you won't forget?
I think my biggest life lesson was probably to embrace the fear and do something anyways. So there were a lot of times in France and traveling, I got to go to Morocco and Spain and many other places where I was totally terrified. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know the language. I don't know the customs, the culture, any of this, and I'm going to do it anyways. And there was not a single time that that did not work out in my favor. Like, obviously, a little bit rough sometimes, but embracing that fear let me have so many beautiful experiences, and people are a lot more understanding than like your anxiety will work it up to be. So I would just say, yeah, that's the biggest thing that I learned.
I love that. Thanks for sharing.
Of course, thank you.
All right, perfect. So we are going to move on to our next presenter, and that is going to be Brian. So go ahead.
All right. I hope you guys can see this. My name is Brian. I am an international student from China. I've been here for 6 years, since 2014. I am a senior at PLU, majoring in nursing. And here is my presentation. So, if we pull a random guy in PLU and ask him what is his most favorite thing in China, he might say Chinese calligraphy, Chinese history, or traveling, if he's a Chinese major student, right? But more likely, he will say Chinese food, Kung Fu, and Bruce Lee. Almost everybody knows Bruce Lee. But if you ask them about panda, everybody will say, ooh, they're so cute, I love pandas. So today, I want to talk about the most favorite Chinese culture, except panda and food, so the Chinese Kung Fu. Sorry, I'm not a biology major, so I can't talk about pandas. But before I start showing you some crazy moves, I want to warn you that you should not try this at home, or at least practice under the supervision of your guardians, because it can be very dangerous. And I'm just kidding. I can't show you how to perform Kung Fu because I don't know how to. But I will show you some clips of Kung Fu fighting without blood though, so I hope you guys are okay with it. With that said, let's begin. So Kung Fu is another name for martial art. it can be anything from fighting empty-handed to using weapons. From today, we are only talking about hand-to-hand combat Kung Fu, and we're not talking about weapon styles because there's just too much of it. And it's really important to know that Kung Fu is not one style. Unlike karate or judo, which refers to only one style of martial art and you know exactly what you are talking about, Kung Fu is more of a general term that is referring to a group of Chinese martial arts. So the history of Kung Fu really started in the very early days of Chinese civilization, when the idea Tai Chi was formed. And Kung Fu continued to exist and it developed during the Tang Dynasty, which is around 7 centuries or so, because it was part of the test for them to get into the government at that time. And the Kung Fu that we all know today was shaped during the Qing Dynasty, which is around 17th century, and later in the 20th century during there was a lot of war and colonialism. And there was a lot of chaos in the society and people really needed power to defend themselves. So many styles of Kung Fu was formed during that period. And also many of them quickly died off due to having no successors. And most of the Kung Fu that you see today was formed during that time, and then it was kind of it was kind of pushed out to overseas because of Hollywood, because of Bruce Lee and other stars. And Chinese martial art, or Kung Fu, has changed a lot since the 20th century. Kung Fu used to be a way of defending yourselves, so it was comprised of many deadly moves. It was practiced by many people, military person or just civilians. Because it was a chaotic time and people needed power to defend themselves, it was also a sport in a way because people made competition for it. And some people made friends during the process, and probably some died during the competition too because there wasn't enough protection. And some moves are just too deadly that they should really ban it. But nowadays, Kung Fu is more like a form of performance rather than a combat skills. Because after World War II, people really wanted peace, but not violence. And the society had become more stable and peaceful. And most importantly, firearms was really good at this job. So most of the deadly moves are gone because people don't really need them anymore, and they become a performance. And you may ask why no sports event was made for it, and that's probably because there are too many different styles. It's really hard to judge who is the winner when different styles are trying to do different things, and you can't really bend one move. And some of the moves are just still too dangerous for it to be in a friendly competition. And as we talked about, Kung Fu has many different styles. I can't get into all of them, but I want to show you the top 4 most popular styles that you might have seen in movies. There are Wing Chun, Shaolin, Ba Gua, and Tai Chi. So let's start with Wing Chun. Wing Chun was formed in the Qing Dynasty. And in the 20th century, a master of Wing Chun called Yip Man made it popular. And there was actually a movie for Yip Man. Oh, by the way, his name is pronounced as Yip Man, but not IP Man. So please don't call him IP Man, please. Other popular stars who practice Wing Chun include Bruce Lee, Yip Man, obviously, who is actually the teacher of Kung Fu of Bruce Lee, and Robert Downey Jr. So imagine Iron Man playing Wing Chun. But it's actually true. There is a video on YouTube of him practicing Wing Chun if you guys want to check it out. And the picture on top right is Bruce Lee learning Wing Chun from Yip Man. And Wing Chun favors a high stand with knees tucked in, as you can see on the top left section. Plus having like very minimal movements, some people in the past didn't like it and thought it lacks manhood. But the efficiency of Wing Chun and how good it was quickly shut it their mouth. Wun Chun likes being fast and agile. It attacked enemy center line with compact hits and go back to defense with both arm and legs. I want to play a movie clip from the movie Yin Man, and you can see if you can identify some of the features of Wun Chun. And you can kind of see how he was just moving straight and moving back. He is not going left or right. And that's kind of how Shaolin Kung Fu works. And next up is Ba Gua Zhang. The term Ba Gua refers to the 8 diagrams that is shown on the left. It originates from the old Chinese religion called Taoism. Taoism was huge in China until Tang Dynasty, when the emperor decided to make Buddhism the national religion. But Taoism is still around until these days, and many Chinese culture is still based on Taoism. Anyway, Bagua palms has 64 different basic moves for attacking. Thus, the style really features on being unpredictable with the moves, and attack on unpredictable angles too. But all the moves in that clip is actually real Tai Chi moves. It may be a little bit too dramatic, but Tai Chi can still be very cool, and that's my point. Lastly, before I finish here, I just want to show you how you can greet each other like you practice martial art. You may have noticed in the previous videos of this hand gesture on the top right. It is quite simple, so I want you to do it with me if possible. So first, you want to have your left palm kind of make a straight palm, and then you want to have it around the chest level. And for your right hand, you want to make a fist. And with your left hand, you really want to make everything straight and closed, and you want to have your thumb tucked in. And you want to put your right hand in the middle of your left hand, and you just want your elbows real high, not like down, because that will make you look like you're like not really interested in the other person. So you want to like high, and then you want to just have it at chest level and be really confident and just shake it. So that's kind of how you can greet each other in a way that looks like you practice martial art. And there are also like variants like this, and it is also acceptable. And many people also use it too. I don't know if you have noticed, but the person did this in the first movie clip, and that is for a reason. We can talk about it because there's a meaning to your gestures. For the 4 fingers on your left hand, it means the good quality of a person. So it means wisdom. It means good virtue. So you have like good qualities, and it means wisdom, physical strength, and beauty. And for the thumb that is tucked in, that means you are not having too much ego. You are being humble for lessons. And for your right hand, it's a fist, so it means your power. So it means you practice martial art. And having your left hand over your right hand means that the good qualities and your virtue will guide the power. And that's why some people do this, because they really like cover their powers. But be careful not to do like this way, so the other way around though, because if you have your left palm as a left hand as a palm, it means you are only challenging to a fight. But if you have right hand as a palm, it means you are challenging them to a fight to the death. So don't do that. And that is my presentation.
Very important to know that you don't want to challenge someone to a fight to the death. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and not many people still use that hand gesture anymore, but it is really good because you don't have to touch anybody. You can stay 6 feet apart, and yeah, recommended.
Yeah. So in the beginning, you mentioned that people used to need to know Kung Fu to get a role in the government. Mm-hmm. Do you think many people in Chinese government today know Kung Fu?
No. Obviously, Kung Fu is not really practiced anymore as like a way to defend yourselves. It is just more of a physical exercise and a performance. So people don't do it anymore. And the reason why people in Tang Dynasty did it, because you elect them for general, right? You elect them to go to wars.
So what type of Kung Fu is practiced most commonly?
In China, I will say Shaolin, because they are actually one of the, I would say, only Kung Fu organization that is still, alive. And they're still huge. They still have a temple. They still have like thousands of people coming to visit, and they still take students, even foreigners. So yeah, I would say that's probably the most popular and the one that is still alive. But Wing Chun is also popular. Tai Chi is practiced by many people, even old people. But it's just more of an exercise, and there's no not a systematic thing to it.
Either currently today or maybe in history, were the different types of Kung Fu practiced in different regions in China, or was it more just anywhere you could find the different styles?
There is like many different style based on locations. We have many different sayings, but generally they say if you're in the north, you kind of practice more with your fist, and if you are in the south, you do with palms, and it's I don't have a lot of understanding in that part. And kung fu is kind of like dying right now. So
So I have a question that's just more about life in China in general.
sure.
So do people get around primarily using bikes, which was pretty common several years ago? Or I guess what is the most common form of public transportation?
That really depends on which city you're in.
Mhm.
I come from Shenzhen, which is like right above Hong Kong, and it's rather like developed. And people usually get around by train, by bus, because you can just go anywhere with train and bus. But if you are in the countryside, people still prefer cars. And bikes is used a lot in Shenzhen too, and we actually have like rental bikes for everyone, and it's really cheap.
Nice. Could you elaborate more on how Taoism and Buddhism are connected with Kung Fu?
Yeah. So, we can start with Buddhism because that's really just Shaolin. The the like how it started is because Shaolin is just a temple, right? And from one time, one like really popular or like a really high monk, I don't know how to say it. So really popular monk came to the temple and decided to just stay there, and many like people wanted to join the temple to like hear from him, right? And many of the people who actually joined is people who already knows martial art. So the monk kind of just gathered this martial artist and then giving them the space to discuss kung fu, and they just made like by time they just made up their own kind of system. But Shaolin was also said to be connected to the government because during the Tang Dynasty, government really spent a lot of money just promoting Buddhism culture. And receiving the money from the government means you have to do something for them, right? So some say that Shaolin was also involved in part of like some wars. But yeah, so that's kind of how Shaolin developed. For Taoism is mainly just the idea that every of Tai Chi. Tai Chi it just means the beginning of universe, and it can have like a lot of meanings to it. And many people would spend life understanding the concept of Tai Chi. And from some of the concept like the circle or like the 8 diagrams uh, photo that I've shown you, some people got the idea of like being smooth, not hitting the people head on, and just run around them, find the weak spot and attack them. So kind of like that, Taoism is inspired them to make a Kung Fu style.
Thank you. And then we have another question. This is from someone who studied in China a while ago, so in the 1980s. And they wanted to know, have you heard of things called friendship stores? I don't know how that would translate. So friendship stores.
I have not really heard about it. And 1980s, I probably is not even born. But
it could still exist.
Yeah, if you wanna like give me more information, like what it is, what's for, or some of that, maybe I would know. And like it really changed a lot since the 1980s or so, because of the economy is developing a lot, and many of those stuff are probably gone.
I got more information. So stores that only foreigners could shop in.
Oh, I don't think that really exists anymore. I would say a form similar to that is the tax-free store that you can find in the Chinese Hong Kong border. That is like if you are traveling to Hong Kong or if you are crossing the Hong Kong border, you can buy it from there. But there is no restriction where like only foreigners can buy and other people can't.
Nice.
Any store that I've known of. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I think that is it. So thanks so much.
Thank you guys for listening.
All right. So now I'm going to invite our last panelist, Ileana.
My name is Ileana. I am a junior. My laptop will freak out if I share my screen, so Heather is so nice to share it for me. I'm a junior. I studied abroad in Spain this past spring, which, as we all know, it did unfortunately get cut off, so I may not have had a very long experience, but I'd like to say I had a very in-depth experience. And so what I'd like to talk about is a bit about the Iberian Peninsula itself and then my experiences there. So the Iberian Peninsula has a very long and well-documented history. As many of you may have learned about, the Roman Empire spanned through most of Europe, including this peninsula. Prior to that, the peninsula was inhabited by multiple groups, including the Iberians and Celts. As the Roman Empire spread through Europe, it took around 200 years before the peninsula was ruled by the Romans for the next 600 years. As the Roman Empire fell, the peninsula was ruled by different smaller groups of people, until most of the peninsula was ruled by the Muslim kings. They ruled over the central and southern areas of the peninsula, with their capital located in Cordoba. And this lasted from the 8th century until the 12th century. During this period, Cordoba was a cultural, economic, and scientific epicenter, with many advances in trigonometry, astronomy, and surgery. Then came the Reconquista, where the Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand conquered most of the peninsula, forming what is now the Kingdom of Spain, and leaving Portugal to be Portugal. Granada, the city where I lived, was the location of where the Muslim kings surrendered in order to prevent more lives from being lost. Next slide, please. So I lived in Granada. It's part of the autonomous community of Andalusia. It's actually a word that was derived from the Arabic word al-Andalus, the name of this region of Spain. Interestingly, the Spanish language has a lot of words that derive from Arabic, and you can figure that out by looking for words beginning with al. I know Andalusia doesn't begin with al, but there's a lot of other examples, such as almohada. Next slide, please. So just really quickly to show you what I'll be talking about, I'm going to talk about the Alhambra, the mosque cathedral, and then a few extra pictures that I couldn't help but put in. So the Alhambra, which take note of it beginning with Al, in fact, the name Alhambra means the red one because these castles were built from tapia, which has a reddish hue. Anyways, the Alhambra isn't actually a singular castle. It's a series of castles at the top of a mountain in Granada. If you take a look at them, the outside of them don't look very interesting, right? And that's on purpose, because in Muslim culture, one shouldn't outwardly make a show of their money because in God's eyes, everyone is equal and one shouldn't make an attempt to be better than the other. Next slide, please. The inside, however, can be lavish and beautiful, and that was probably my favorite thing about the Alhambra. Outside, it seems to be a boring location, but inside, it's really breathtaking and beautiful, and there's a lot of opportunities for pictures that you don't even realize. I have about 1 million. They also were very shaky pictures because I was walking a lot and very tired. So the only picture out of these 3 that I took was the center one, which is probably one of my most favorite pictures. The other 2 I found off Google. Next slide, please. So it's also important to note that there aren't any depictions of important or holy figures in Muslim art or architecture because you're not allowed to worship any other person or deity. So to prevent that, there's no pictures of people. Like, it's almost rare, and if they do exist, they're very labeled so that like nobody mistakes it and accidentally will worship the wrong person. So there are 3 main components of Muslim art, and that is geometric shapes, fruit and vegetables, and script. Throughout the Alhambra, there's a phrase repeated. So in each of these pictures that I took, it has the same phrase written that spreads through each wall of the Alhambra, and it means only God is victorious. Okay, next slide, please. There we go. So this is an outside picture of the Mosque Cathedral in Cordoba. Like I said previously, this was like a cultural hub. It was a huge city. And so the mosque had to be huge for people to go worship in. It actually started off smaller, but then over the years, as the population grew, they spread outward and outward and outward until they had to stop because right at the end of that building is a river, and they couldn't exactly build on top of a river. I think we could figure that out, but I don't think they wanted to. During the Reconquista, well, actually, I should back up a bit. When one religion is taking over another area that was previously like taken care of by a different religion, it's pretty customary for them to build their new religious site, such as a church or a mosque, over the previous religion site. And in this situation, interestingly enough, instead of taking down the entire mosque, as other times have happened, they just built a cathedral right into the center of it. So the building that juts out, like the part that juts out, is the entire section of the cathedral, and all of the flattish area of the building is the mosque part of it. Next slide, please. So these are pictures showing kind of what the differences are. So the picture all the way on the left is a picture I took that has arrows on which side is the mosque and which side is the cathedral. The center picture shows another bit of the ceiling of the cathedral because, like, as we saw in the previous slides, it's a lot taller, a lot higher, and that gives space for the big windows. And that's what lets in a lot of the light. In the mosque side, it's generally dim, but not as dim as what my picture shows. That's just my camera that freaks out a bit. Another interesting thing about the mosque part of the cathedral is that there are a lot of pillars, and it almost looks like a forest. So if you look at this picture, it gives you generally a good idea of what this forest looks like. When you're in there, it looks almost never ending. It was kind of an overwhelming experience because from the outside it looks huge, but from the inside it looks even bigger, which is a shocker. It took like an hour and a half for my tour to go around it, which was fun, tiring, and cold. It was super cold in there, which I thought was very interesting, but I think it's because all the floors just like retain all the cold. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is some more pictures of it. On the left side, the left picture, it is a picture of the outside, which you can kind of see from the stripes on that one circular bit that it reflects the inside with all of the arches, but it also is like kind of dull, one, due to like wear and tear and aging itself, but also because of that thing I mentioned previously when I talked about the Alhambra, that they don't make the outside of things very lavish, and that's on purpose. My favorite thing was that tower. So currently, that tower works as the bell tower for the cathedral. Previously, it worked as the tower that they used to call to prayer, which I think is very interesting to see across cultures, that there's like always a call to prayer tower, or at least pretty typically. I saw a lot of them in Spain. It was super cool. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm on to the extras section. I kind of wanted to talk about something that was like a huge difference that I noticed from from America to Spain. One thing were like the walkways and alleyways. I took so many pictures of them because I felt like I was in shock at how small the walkways could get. They're not like teensy weensy, some are, but not all of them are. But because it's pretty typical to walk everywhere, I felt so shocked at like how many different places I walked through, and I took so many pictures. It was so cool. On the right side, there's a picture of a fountain. That fountain I actually walked by every single day on my way to school. I miss that fountain so much. It's so fun. The bottom left picture is the view from the top of the Alhambra. And it's so awesome. So that's, if you like on top of the Alhambra, you look to the right side, that's your view. If you look straight ahead, there's a whole view of the rest of Granada. And if you look to the left, you get like an awesome view of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Can you go to the next slide, please? And these are because I saw some of the most beautiful sunsets and like picturesque views when I was there. The top left picture was taken in Cordoba on the bridge. So that bridge is actually a really old bridge from Roman times. So it's called the Roman Bridge. That was an awesome sunset. And in the bottom, in the middle, those are the Sierra Nevada mountains. And then on the top right, you can also see like a teensy little glimpse of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And that's along the river Genil. And last thing. There's a lot of different street art and graffiti. I took a lot of pictures of the graffiti. Like some of them were just regular, just like spray painting some words, but some of them are really like profound images that made me want to sit there and think for a minute, and I have a bunch of pictures of those. Anyways, that's all. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, so what are the differences between the regions of Spain, like between the north and the south, or the different autonomous regions?
So I didn't get to experience them myself, but I did learn about them in classes. Mm-hmm. Where I lived was the south of Spain, and when learning about the north of Spain, it was very interesting. From the professors that taught me were like born and raised in the south of Spain, and so the way that they would like to define it is that Spain is very traditional, and like you can even see that in terms of like when you're out for a walk, the way that people dress. An example that my program coordinator gave me was that a student was with their host family and she really needed to go to the doctor. It wasn't like a super emergency, life or death or anything, but she needed to go to the doctor like pretty ASAP. And the host mom went and started getting dressed and putting on makeup. and she goes, aren't we gonna leave soon? And she was like, oh yeah, I'm getting ready, let's just give me 10 minutes. And the way that my coordinator compared that to the north of Spain is that the north of Spain kind of has a different sense of fashion that also falls into like different views on life. In the southern part of Spain, it seems to be a bit slower, bit like chiller, kind of like you can show up late to work because you saw your cousin in the street and you guys like started talking, versus in the north of Spain, they wouldn't really like that so much.
That's nice. Good example. Can you elaborate more on the reason for building the cathedral within the mosque? It's it's pretty unusual to just see them existing together. So do you know why they did that?
I have to say, I feel like I have no idea. I can give my own educated guesses, and I'm pretty sure they had taught us before, but maybe I don't remember it so much. But I think it was because so in the cathedral right now, they also have like, oh man, I don't even know what it's called. They have people buried in there. And so they use part of the mosque space as like, I don't know if the correct word is like a mausoleum.
Yeah, like a mausoleum or maybe a crypt or something.
I think it's a crypt. I'm totally unsure of the correct word, but there are people buried in there. And so I think it was more of a giving us more space so that like we can eventually move into it. But for now, this is the section that we're using.
Interesting. So the cathedral is very beautiful and seems reminiscent of like Renaissance architecture. Do you know anything? Did you learn about the symbolism used in cathedrals?
Yes, I did happen to learn a lot about that. What I can remember is like a huge important symbolism is the windows, and also the decision to use like mostly white throughout the cathedral, because the windows are meant to represent like God's light shining in and onto you. And then the white of the building itself will reflect that and make things feel even brighter, even on like a gloomy day. So the symbolism behind that is like kind of showing more purity, more like you are being covered in God's light, things like that.
Very nice. Let's see what else we have. Did you experience some intercultural challenges while in Spain? And what was it like living with a host family?
I did experience quite a few challenges. They were like resolved pretty well in the end, but living with the host family was very interesting because so I'm Mexican, my family is Mexican, so I've got that culture in my head related to Spanish. So moving into Spain was very different because like while I do know that different cultures exist within Spanish speaking, it's like a new learning experience. So there was that. There was a lot of experiences of me saying a word that's very typical, like typically spoken in Mexico, that is not used in Spain. That was a fun experience. There's some pretty simple ones, like to say juice in Spain is zumo, Z-U-M-O, but to say it in Mexico, and also like here in the US, it's jugo, J-U-G-O. But apparently in Spain, when you say jugo, they're referring to like blood. It was so confusing. Oh my goodness.
That's funny. So you kind of it's like you had this insider knowledge, but in the different country, it actually wasn't. Perfect. And then you talked a bit about the Reconquista. What lasting effect has it had on Spanish culture?
Ooh, there's one that I do know. So, because the Reconquista was like Christians coming in and trying to get Muslim people and Jewish people to convert into Christianity and Catholicism, Both Muslim and Jewish people can't eat pork. And so what became super popular in Spain was that every restaurant began serving pork. And if a person refused to eat pork, then they would be like reported as someone who was refusing to convert, and then that became its own issue. That has still had a lasting effect because pork is in a lot of dishes. It's still in every restaurant. There's like specific stores meant for pork. It's just sold everywhere. You can see it everywhere. I don't eat pork because I have an allergy to it. And so when I told my host mom about it, she was like, oh, no way, you don't have an allergy to it. Everybody eats it. Nobody's allergic to it. And so that was also a cultural challenge. It was just more like trying to talk about it, and also me being nervous and not being able to speak perfect Spanish, that I was like, please, I don't get what's going on. But yeah, that is definitely a lasting effect that there was.